we're gonna begin with the end of an era for Aerosmith. Welcome to Get to the Hook. I am your co-host, Charles Latibaudiere.
And I am your co-host, Eric Colley.
And we come to you this week with some sad news. We've lost some greats. Nobody died. That's the good news. No one died. But their performing careers apparently have died. At least two of them definitely, and a third one is still up in the air. But we're gonna begin with the end of an era for Aerosmith, and maybe the end of their performing altogether.
I mean, they say it is.
But they're definitely not going to be doing anything live because of Steven Tyler's vocal injury, which they say he will not recover from. So that means no more touring for Aerosmith. And like we said, maybe they can't even record in the studio. But
I don't think they will. I think this is it. It's weird to see like a band die in a way. Like you said, nobody in the band has died.
Yeah.
But Aerosmith, it seems like, is done. And they were on their farewell tour, which this is their second farewell tour. They did one back in 2017. Right. And I think we've all gotten kind of numb to farewell tours.
Right. And we think that it's just a thing that they do for, just to drum up publicity, to make more people come out because you're never going to see them again. But this time we're really not going to see them again. And if you haven't, you missed out. And Eric and I were just talking about it before we started recording this. I've never seen Aerosmith live in concert.
I never did either, and now we won't.
And now it feels like, oh, I missed out. So all those times when you see some legacy act that comes around and you're like, whatever, I'll see him on their next farewell tour. Maybe you should actually take them up on it,
right?
Because you never know.
Because when they did their actual final show in September of last year, they didn't know it was actually going to be their last show. It was in Elmont, New York last September. Aerosmith was performing, and Steven Tyler fractured his larynx. Well, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it sounds bad.
It sounds very painful.
Right. And so they have now released a statement because the tour was supposed to resume this fall. They said, sadly, it is clear that a full recovery from his vocal injury is not possible. We have made a heartbreaking and difficult but necessary decision as a band of brothers to retire from the touring stage. And they are in their mid to late 70s now. So
yeah, and so normally you'd be like, well, that's fine. They're really old, and of course they're going to retire. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we have the Rolling Stones out there as this example, and so everyone expects that that's how, when you're a rock and roll group, that's how you should go out. You die on stage, essentially, which is what's going to happen with them. But that's not the fate for Aerosmith.
It is not. It's kind of a sad end because there's been so much turmoil and conflict in Aerosmith since basically the beginning of that band. They broke up sort of once and people quit, but otherwise they are such a unique story, I think, in music. Not for any band just to endure for 50 years is rare as it is.
Right.
With essentially the same lineup. It's been mostly the same five guys this whole time. And they did fall off and then launched a comeback and not only came back bigger, but rewrote their whole legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna run through I guess we're gonna do a bit of an obit for Aerosmith, and then we'll get to a couple of other big bands calling it quits or coming close to it anyway. But Aerosmith, they deserve to be
a little tribute.
They deserve a tribute.
Yeah, Aerosmith. Fun fact: I did see their last show in September. Do you know what the last song they played live was?
I mean,
go ahead and guess.
I mean, they don't want to miss a thing as a closing song, right? No. Walk This Way. It's got to be one.
Kinda. That's the last full song they performed. But their last show was September 9th of last year. Joe Perry, guitar player, his birthday is September 10th. So technically, the last song Aerosmith ever played live was Happy Birthday.
Oh. This is sad.
And I think had they known that was going to be their last show, that might not be how they went out.
It just got so much sadder.
Right. I know. But so, yeah, Walk This Way was. But yeah, let's look at Aerosmith, because this career, it is a fascinating career. It spans pretty much all of our lives, everybody. Their first single, the very first song they put out there from their debut self-titled album back in 1973, only got to number 59 the first time around. It's probably their signature song, the defining song. This is Dream On.
Dream on, dream on, dream on, dream until your dream come true.
That is such a great great song.
It is a tremendous song. Actually, I heard that song. God, it was a couple of months ago. I was driving home. I remember right where I was on the road, and then the song just hit me that day. And I said, and this may piss off a lot of people from Boston, nothing better than that song has ever come out of Boston. There may be things that
You're a
parallel,
New
and
Yorker.
I know Donna Summer is out of Boston, so that's in
The
New Edition.
Cars, New Edition.
Nothing the Cars did comes close to that.
Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. Come on.
No, just no.
Hater.
It's to me, not only their signature song, I just think it's the best.
It's one of the greatest songs, like of classic rock of any genre. When he starts doing that screaming at the end of the song, it was something different. But it did not click.
And that's
the first
the thing
time.
about Steven Tyler. Like, he's screaming, but it doesn't feel like it's not. Oh, stop screaming! Like it works with the songs when he's doing it. But didn't. So the first time around, it only gets to 59.
Yeah.
When did they re-release it?
So their third album comes out. Their first two albums didn't do that well. They were on Columbia Records, and this is back in the days when you could actually take a while to build a career. Labels weren't just like a hit out of the gate or we're dropping you. The first two albums didn't do super well. Third album, Toys in the Attic, which has gone on to sell 9 million copies, gave them their first hit with this song, Sweet Emotion. And that wasn't a huge hit at the time, but it cracked the top 40 and it got Aerosmith out there and got their name out and people started buying the album. So while they had this momentum, Columbia was like, Dream On was a good song and deserves another chance. They re-release it in 76 and it goes to number 6.
What a difference.
Right.
So you just need something to introduce. You got to get something to get them in the church, and then if you got good music, they'll come around.
Yeah, and Aerosmith had so many hits throughout the 70s. The original Walk This Way, Back in the Saddle, Draw the Line, Mama Ken, all these great songs that are staples of classic rock radio to this day. But things kind of fell apart for Aerosmith at the end of the 70s because a lot of it was their drug abuse. They acknowledge that very honestly now. And Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, who are sort of the Mick and Keith of Aerosmith,
Yes.
have not always gotten, probably rarely have gotten along, honestly. Those are egos and personalities that clash a lot. There was a concert in 79 where they got into a fist fight backstage. That was the end. Joe Perry quit, walks out on the band, starts the Joe Perry Project, his solo thing that never really took off.
Right.
Brad Whitford, the rhythm guitar player, also quits the band. Aerosmith scrambling to find replacements. They put out an album called Night in the Ruts, which kind of lived up to its title. Did not do very well.
Really? Wait,
Yeah.
I didn't know they recorded an album with.
They did a couple albums. And then after
Without
5 years.
Joe?
Yeah. Well, Joe was on a couple songs in that album, but they're
Right.
like, we got to finish the record. So they got somebody else in. They got somebody to replace Brad Whitford. So that was the only real lineup change they ever had. And it just didn't work. And also when the 80s came in, music was changing. Aerosmith were just yesterday's heroes. They kind of fell apart. Then in 84, they got back together and realized, none of this is working. We all miss each other. Let's try it again. They did an album called Done with Mirrors in 85 that actually didn't do that well either, but it did get them back.
Right.
Because one of the problems was they still had their drug addictions, a lot of them. So they went through rehab. Mid-80s, they're like, okay, we are clear minds. We're like energized. We're ready to go.
How do we do this thing? How do we get in on this MTV thing?
Yeah, how do we get back and become relevant in the mid-80s now? Because it's been almost a decade at this point. Enter Run DMC. And it's weird that Aerosmith plays such a huge role in the birth of rap as a popular art form.
Right.
Because the very first top 10 rap hit ever, not counting Blondie's Rap
Right.
is this, Run DMC and Aerosmith, Walk This Way.
She told me to walk this way, talk this way, walk this way, talk this way. She told me to walk this way.
Pretty amazing.
So you
That
definitely, you remember when that came out.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know who Aerosmith was when that video hit?
I knew him because I knew, basically, I think I knew Dream On and Sweet Emotion is probably really all I knew at that point. So I knew of them.
I just knew there were these two old white dudes in the Run DMC video. I'm like, who are these guys?
Yeah.
Why are they in Run DMC's music video?
It really it made me actually want to know more about who they were, other than just having heard those two songs on the radio. Then you start to look into like, oh, who are they? And actually, as it turns out, I went to college, and one of my roommates was like a diehard Aerosmith guy. Like, had seen them, I don't know how many dozens of times in concert.
Was he from Boston?
No, he's from upstate New York. Yeah.
Did you think he was a traitor?
I didn't give him that much crap for it. Actually, it was good to help me learn more about the group. So
But this is one of those times of just perfect synchronicity of, so Aerosmith has gone through rehab, their heads are clean, they are back together, they're ready to go, they get this breakthrough with Run DMC. So they have a chance, and they took it, and it worked. One of the greatest comebacks. 87, Aerosmith comes out with their Permanent Vacation album, and the lead single puts them back in the top 20 without a rapper for the first time since the 70s. With this song, which is probably problematic by today's standards, but it was a classic in 87. Here's Dude Looks Like a Lady.
Like you said, definitely maybe problematic these days.
Yeah, I don't think that would fly
but
today.
it was perfect for an MTV music video.
And that era of hair bands where all the guys had their hair teased out and all the makeup, like all those hairband dudes were very pretty.
Yeah.
They were very pretty. And it was sort of poking fun at that scene.
Right.
And it could have just been a one-off, like, okay, Aerosmith got one more hit, good for them. They followed that up with Angel, was their first top 5 hit. Ragdoll was a huge hit. The album sold millions of copies. And then they followed that up with the Pump album, Love in an Elevator, Janie's Got a Gun. Aerosmith suddenly became one of the biggest bands in the world, bigger than they had been even in the 70s, which is wild to me. And through the 90s, remember the videos for Crying and Amazing, which introduced Alicia Silverstone to the world. Liv Tyler got her big break.
Yeah.
Shortly after she found out she was Steven Tyler's daughter, because she didn't know for a long time. It's just weird to me that as grunge was taking off and gangsta rap and all the things in the 90s that were happening, like rave music, Aerosmith,
these guys were still doing classic rock and doing it at a level where there wasn't anybody else really in the classic rock game that was putting out new music and
having
charting
hits.
and having hits with it.
It's crazy, that they didn't try to fit into any of the trends. Like Aerosmith could have tried to grunge up their music.
They did the power ballad thing. They leaned into that, definitely.
But by the time they were hitting a lot of those big power ballads, they were kind of done.
Yeah.
Like a lot of those hairband power ballads, like Angel in 88 was, that was definitely.
And clearly they saw that Angel, how that worked, and they're like, yeah, we should get another one of those.
I guess the ballad from their 89 album Pump was Janie's Got a Gun, and that's about a girl killing her dad for molesting her. So
that
not
Pump,
the typical power
Pump didn't
ballad.
have one really, but then they made up for it.
Yeah, then it just became slow song after slow song. And then they really, and this is, again, talk about weird career trajectories. They have this big resurgence in the 80s. It lasts through the 90s. They're right up there with all the biggest bands in the 90s for selling records and selling out tours. And then 97, their album Just Push Play comes out, and it sort of seems like maybe the Renaissance is wearing off.
Right.
Pink and Falling in Love is Hard on the Knees were not huge hits, but it's like, okay, it's 97 now. Like, this is the era of the Spice Girls. It seems like Aerosmith is, the time has passed again. And then Fluke of Flukes, 1998, they wind up doing a song for a soundtrack.
It's always the soundtrack.
And it became their first and only #1 single, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I don't know. I always wonder how they feel about that.
But this was far and away, chart-wise, their biggest hit. And this is a song a whole younger generation, it's probably the only Aerosmith song they know, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing.
I don't wanna fall asleep 'cause I miss you, baby, and I don't wanna miss a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From
Weird.
Armageddon, which was such a cheeseball, corny movie.
How
Liv
dare
Tyler
you?
starred
How
in it.
dare
Oh,
you?
come on.
Armageddon was a summer banger. What are
It
you talking
was,
about?
and it was cheesy and corny. Miners
I guess
flying to an
by-
asteroid to drop a nuke into the middle of it. And
You don't know it can't happen, Eric. You don't know.
I hope we never have to find out. You know who that song was actually written for? So Diane Warren, who's written
Right.
all these great power ballads specifically for movies, she wrote that song, and she had one person specifically in mind that she heard singing it.
I'm guessing Celine Dion.
It was Celine Dion, and it's so easy to picture. You know, I could stay awake just to hear you breathing. I can hear Celine Dion doing that. But she was just coming off of My Heart Will Go On, and Celine's.
Right. And she was like, I don't want to do another soundtrack thing. I
And-
don't want to become the female Kenny Loggins.
And because Liv Tyler was in the movie, it just sort of made it seem obvious. You'd go to Steven Tyler,
Right.
have him do it, and it worked out for Aerosmith.
Worked out great.
And that little bump kept them going into the 21st century. Do you remember their last top 10 hit from 2001?
I definitely do not.
You don't. It was a legit hit. Hit number 7. This is Jaded.
I guess I do now.
That's a catchy song.
It is.
I
Now
like
that as
that.
I heard it.
And it's
like, yeah.
poppier than most Aerosmith songs, but it still sounds like an Aerosmith song.
Yeah.
And that 2001 was a big year for them. They got in the Rock Hall of Fame. Also did the Super Bowl with NSYNC, Britney Spears, Nelly, Mary J. Blige. It was
They were
them showing we are
so
still relevant.
Yep, we're relevant.
And that was their last big hit.
It's interesting, people always say the phrase you always hear about Aerosmith is they're the American Stones, right? Because they have the dynamic of Steven and Joe, just like
Even
the Stones have Mick and Keith.
Mick and Keith refer to themselves when they produce records as the Glimmer Twins. And as a play on that, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry called themselves the Toxic Twins.
Right.
Because
There you go.
they
So-
do not work well together, except they have for 50 plus years.
But the thing is interesting. I mean, and I get why they have that title because they're a rock band, a blues based rock band from the States as opposed to the UK, but their careers are not similar at all in the the trajectory of them. I mean, Aerosmith was way more relevant at the end of their run, or toward the last 25 years of their run, than the Stones have been. Although the Stones still sell incredible when they tour, they sell out stadiums. But as far as selling records, that era stopped for them a long time
Yeah,
ago.
although the Stones' new album, Hackney Diamonds, did
Yes.
debut top 5.
Yeah.
Like, it's doing fairly well. And that's the thing, too. It's hard to compare because, well, like the Stones, Aerosmith, they've only released 2 albums in the last 20 years. They put out that blues covers record, Honkin' on Bobo, in 2004 or 5. That's the name of it. I didn't name it that. But the last album they released was Music from Another Dimension in 2012. So that's been 12 years ago now. So even if they aren't going to play, if they can't tour anymore, people think, well, maybe they could still record if Steven Tyler could do that. But they haven't been recording for over a decade anyway.
Yeah.
And, Steven Tyler went off and did American Idol, did a country record. I think that's partly...
Joe Perry was off doing his thing.
Right. And I think their egos have always clashed. And now in their mid to late 70s, there's probably a part of them, maybe they're happy to be done with each other. You remember Joey Kramer, the drummer, got kicked out for a while, and they
Yes.
wouldn't let him rehearse with them. He said it's because he was a Trump supporter and they were more liberal. They said because he wasn't a good enough drummer anymore, which is much
really
more
got-
painful. That hurts.
Yeah, I know. At some
But
point,
he
Joey's
was
like,
on
I
this
wish I
tour.
hadn't.
They have always managed to come back together some way, somehow. And kind of sad that they didn't get a real final show, knowing that it was going to be the final show.
If he could get to that point, if he could recover, they would do one show. They would do
I would
one
think so.
final farewell show, not a tour.
Yeah.
Just do one show somewhere.
They should. In
Yeah.
Boston, probably.
Yeah.
They should finish where they started.
That's what they should do.
Maybe there's like the slightest, glimmer of hope that maybe someday there will be, like you said, one show.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think they will ever tour again.
Did you ever see him in?
Never did.
Yeah,
Never got
me either.
to. Yeah.
Me either. I'm not going to lie and say like, oh, I always wanted to see them. I don't hate on Aerosmith at all, and I like a lot of their songs, but I never loved them enough that I was like, oh, I got to go see them.
Right.
But now they're not here, and now I wish
You really wish you
I
had.
probably should have gone
Because you
once.
wish you had. And it's funny, like we said, to think about, because I always in my head kind of think of Aerosmith as this old school classic rock band, but they were one of the biggest bands for like high school and college for me.
Yeah.
I mean, they were always on the radio. They always had videos out. Those songs are all burned into my head.
Wherever he is, Jeff Roberts is very upset, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Very upset. But so it is. It comes to an end eventually. So should we get to the other
Yeah.
two? Because
Well,
Now,
one
these-
does involve a death.
yes. But basically Stevie Nicks has said Fleetwood Mac is done.
It no longer exists.
Yeah.
It is no longer a going concern, I think.
Was that the phrasing she used?
She did, or Neil Finn played guitar, a guy from Crowded House and
Yeah.
Split Ends. He was touring with Fleetwood Mac as sort of the stand-in for Lindsey Buckingham, who
Right.
they fired, and he had sued them.
And
The
Lindsay
drama
had-
goes on with Fleetwood Mac no matter what. But Neil Finn said, he was asked in an interview, and he goes, Fleetwood Mac is no longer a going concern.
without Christine McVie and without Lindsey Buckingham, it's sad.
It's
And
not Fleetwood
I would think that Stevie and Mick, God, how old is Mick at this point? Like, I think they don't want to do it.
No,
I would
I mean, Mick is he in his 80s? Because remember, Fleetwood Mac was a blues band in the 60s and early 70s, long before Stevie
Yeah.
Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham ever joined. So he was already a little bit older than them at that point, and that's been 50 years ago. So
Right. So I did see them in concert several times. Great. It's just warm, fuzzy, feel-good music.
yeah,
Like, it's
because
great.
those songs are just so untouchable.
Right.
They could, I mean, Stevie Nicks, honestly, she and Mick Fleetwood, if they wanted to, just book an arena and just sit and just play Rumors. They don't even have to like not perform it. I mean, actually just like put on a record and just like, we're going to sit here and listen to it with you. I'm not saying I wouldn't buy a ticket to that.
Right.
Not, I wouldn't pay a lot.
A
but
reasonably priced ticket, you would go to that one.
just to sit in a room and listen to those songs with them, $20, $30, I'd pay
Yeah.
for that.
But that is an end of another era that, and it's kind of happened in stages where you didn't think they were, like when Lindsey Buckingham left, you thought, all right, that's it. They're not going to do it without Lindsey. And then they found a way and they went on. You're like, all right, well, they can keep going.
Yeah.
And then
I think now it's definitely, I think for Stevie, when Christine died, and it was unexpected too, she had a stroke.
Yeah.
And Stevie said, I didn't even get to say goodbye to her.
Yeah.
So kind of the same thing with Aerosmith, where it's sad that these bands that not only were just so huge, but also famous for their live shows, never got to knowingly play a farewell show.
Yeah.
It
You
just
don't have
sort of
that
ended.
moment of them on stage realizing that this is their final
This is
show.
it, yeah.
Sad.
Last
right.
one, this one,
All right, this one, maybe we can find a little bit of positivity here. I feel like we've been in like a very glum.
yeah.
So the Fugees. So the Fugees weren't ever going to play together again. And then Lauryn Hill goes out on her tour and it's going very well. And she's like, you know what? Come on, let's get the group back together. So they
It's been over 20 years.
They did some shows where Praz and
Wyclef.
Wyclef showed up for her shows, and so part of her tour was Lauryn Hill featuring the Fugees. And then they decided, well, that was going well. Let's just do a few shows. So they had scheduled to do that, and now they're unscheduling that.
All canceled.
All canceled. The U.S. dates at this point, anyway. There are some European dates that are still on the schedule.
I doubt those will happen.
We'll see if they happen. But it doesn't look good.
Well, Lauryn Hill had said it was because of clickbaity headlines about her
Showing up late.
and that this like derailed it and ruined it for her. And fans were like, no, it's because you're like 3 hours late all the
Because you
time.
showed up late.
Yeah, and you're not reliable. And then Praz jumped in and was like, yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
He's
Praz
like,
told us,
he
he's like,
sided with the fans.
yeah, Praz told us, he's like, yeah, this is, he said something like, I've been covering up for her for 20 years,
goes,
but
Cat's
here
out
it
of the
is.
bag.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that. And it does kind of suck for Praz and Wyclef because it was also celebrating the Fugees themselves, and particularly their album, The Score, which was this massive moment for them and could have launched them into this next level of superstardom.
Well, I actually think it
Well,
did.
No, I mean, but it
That's
could
why
have
we're
sustained.
even talking about
it could have
Yes.
sustained more, but then she's like, well, I'm going to make my own album.
And
Cool,
unfortunately,
go do your album, and then they all do their own things. Wyclef had his own solo career, was really well. Praz even had some hits. She does Miseducation. That sort of buried Fugees. There's no reason for her to go back to Fugees because of that. But then she never makes a follow-up to that. And by extension, the Fugees never got to make another album. So if you're Wyclef and Praz, your group has finally really become the biggest thing in hip-hop, and it's just gone.
And you can't, and
they've tried to get it back, and they've tried to work with Lauryn. And you remember the
you know
story?
what the problem is? Usually when this happens, when you have a band that makes it and then somebody wants to go do a solo project, the solo projects usually suck. And nobody, ask Mick, ask Keith, ask Joe Perry, they're just not as good as what the band does. And unfortunately, she made a record that was just as good, and some would say better than what the band had done.
I mean, Apple Music voted it the greatest album of all time.
Right. So that's
Education.
You're right. Just buried the hopes of them. And so this was like, all right, they're not going to do another record together, but at least we can see them on stage. And it's not going to happen.
Not even that's going to happen now. And they are very frustrated with her.
They were clearly frustrated. And those few shows that they did together, my sister actually went to one of them in Brooklyn. And she's like, we're 2 hours into it, and everyone's going like, where is she? Because at that point, you're not like, all right, it's a thing that she's late. Like an hour, you go like, yeah, we expected this. Right. You get to 2 hours, and you're like, okay, I got to go to work in the morning.
Well, that's the thing, too. For when you're doing any sort of decades-old reunion tour for an album, the audience that's going to show up for that is going to be of a certain age for the most part. And if it's a Tuesday night and your show is supposed to start at 9.
I believe it was actually the night
really?
It was either a Tuesday or Wednesday.
But that's the thing. I know if I go to a show, I mean, I don't really do weeknight concerts because we get up so early for work. Right. But if it's like, okay, 9 o'clock on a Tuesday, I get to bed, it ends at 11, I get to bed by like midnight. Okay, if I really want to go,
how little sleep you can get.
Yeah, how much can I get by on? But then if they're going to show up 2 hours late and the show starts at 11, and even either it runs till like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, which you don't want, or depending on the venue, because if it's like an outdoor venue,
then it gets cut short.
There's noise ordinances.
Now you're not getting your money's
Yeah, so then you get a 45-minute set that maybe you've waited 25 years for and paid a lot of money for, because those reunion tours, they're never cheap.
As I'm laughing about this, and I realize there are a lot of people listening who will not find this funny at all because they went through this and they got screwed. So yeah, so that's I think that's it for the Fugees.
I think it is. I think Praz, it sounds like. I mean, he's leaving the door open still because again,
Right.
he would love because the score was a major moment in his life. He would love to celebrate that,
Sure.
but he's not going to get to because of her, and he sounds frustrated.
Yeah, he definitely sounds frustrated. And when we asked him about the European dates, he said, "Well, if enough people buy the tickets, I guess they'd go through with it." But
Well, I wonder about that. Do you think it was because of sales? Because we've seen so many artists, Jennifer Lopez and the Black Keys recently, have canceled tours outright because they just weren't selling.
right,
And it could be the venues. So I think some artists have to go to smaller venues at this point, and that's an ego blow.
that is
you don't want to
exactly.
acknowledge.
You don't want to go if you're playing stadiums. You don't want to go down to arenas. If you're doing arenas, you don't want to go down to theaters.
Yeah, but
But-
some people, that's the reality.
Sometimes you have to if you're
Right.
going to keep it going. But
Right.
so overall, we're saying farewell to 3 tremendous groups.
Yeah.
All going out for different reasons. Some in their control, and others totally out
But
of their
I
control.
think we said we joked about bands doing farewell tours. I get the feeling these 3, it's done.
Yeah.
It's really done. And it's sad.
I got 2 out of 3. I got to see 2 out of the 3.
All right.
So I'm going to take that as a win.
Yeah.
That's the positive note that we'll try to end on here. That is going to do it for us this week on Get to the Hook. We will see you next week.